let me just sort of run through the handout. I don't think it'll take very long to run through, but just so you have a feel for what this assignment is all about. The idea here is that I would like you guys to do a sort of library research paper as part of this course. And it's meant to be an opportunity for you to kind of dive into some literature, read some behavior studies, and ideally target something that you find really interesting and sort of flesh that out so that you can customize the content of the course a little bit towards your interests. So we are fulfilling a goal about demonstrating scientific literacy by reading, writing, presenting, and discussing research. We're not going to be verbally discussing or verbally presenting these things. Thought about it, but I think it would just take a long time for us to get through all of them. But you are going to be presenting in a written form your findings on some particular topic related to animal behavior. The idea here is that you'll select some kind of a topic that is, I like to say, some kind of an important topic within animal behavior. And generally speaking, that means, in my mind, that this is something that's not specific to like just one specific species. This is, a important concept that applies across many species. So you see a variety of species doing some particular kind of behavior, and we're trying to understand and explain what it is that they're doing. And so that's kind of the pitch, is you want to try to find some sort of interesting observation that's seen across multiple species, ideally across a variety of groups, and then dive into the literature a bit and discuss some of the explanations that have been put forth to try to explain those behaviors. And really, what I'd like you to do is hone in on a topic where you've got two alternative explanations. So you've got two alternative hypotheses for why animals are doing what they're doing, or how it is that animals are doing what they're doing. And it could be more of like approximate level explanations if you're into that. It could be definitely much more of sort of evolutionary explanations if you're into that. If you look at the way your book is set up, this is kind of like how it's designed, is that it goes from topic to topic. So, each chapter is like a major topic or two, and then it divides that down in lots of smaller topics and then presents alternative explanations and then research that supports or does not support each of those different explanations. So that's more or less what I'm going to ask you guys to do, but I do want you to get into the research and into the literature and actually present literature on your own and not just rely on what the book is reporting. But in that way, I think your book is a really nice resource, because if you're interested in mating behavior, for example, you could sort of flip through the mating behavior chapter and look for interesting topics that are in that chapter. If you're interested in one of the topics that we've already hit this semester and you thought something was really cool, this is an opportunity to really sort of dive into that topic again and say, all right, what else is out there beyond the example or two that might be in the book, that might be interesting and might be worth talking up. It could be the case that you might find two alternative explanations, and one of them is really well supported and the other one is really not well supported anymore. And so your data are going to be very heavily slanted in terms of favoring one hypothesis or the other and over the other, and that's fine. Or you could be in a situation where there are two different explanations, but in some species, explanation A wins out, and in other species, explanation B wins out. And that's also perfectly fine. And that's a very normal sort of thing to have happen. So your job is to basically go find a topic. Again, I really suggest use your book. I think it's a good way to sort of find a topic and be fairly specific in terms of what topic you're going to pursue. It'll make your paper a little bit more focused. And then you are to dive into the literature a bit, and your book even has lots of citations, so you can even start with your book and look at what it's citing, but also I think you should do your own literature searches and see what else you can find on the topic. Let's see. So your task basically is, again, you've picked a topic, you've got two primary explanations that you're sort of pitting against one another, and you are then to find literature that addresses, supports or does not support, each of those two explanations, and then you're going to be presenting that as the basis of your paper. So it says your task is to explain the logic and evidentiary basis of the two hypotheses and also provide contrast between them. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, but they should at least hopefully lead to different predictions. That's ideal. If you have trouble as you're working on this, or you want to bounce some ideas off me, please feel free to come talk to me about it. I'm happy to do that. Or you might say, I'm really interested in this kind of thing, but I can't figure out kind of like what specifically to go after. I can probably help you with that. But I think it definitely works best and is more interesting to you if you go find your own topic as opposed to me just sort of, giving you an assignment, an assigned topic. I think it works better that way. As far as criteria, I guess that is kind of small, but you can pull this up at any time. You will need to find at least 4 articles from scientific journals, and you're going to be using those as major sources within your paper. And there needs to be at least 2 that address each of your different explanations. So you can't just sort of load up on literature from one explanation and have the other one just kind of out there and not really supported or not supported. I do want you to find at least 2 articles that are directly relevant. These articles can be review articles, so that means that they are sort of summarizing the work on one topic, on a particular topic, and those are really nice articles to find, and they, I think, can be very useful as you're writing your paper. I also would like you to get at least 2 articles that are primary literature. So this would mean that you've got some kind of a new study that's been published. So the authors of the study, or authors of the paper, are the ones that conducted the study, and they did some new study on animals or people or some computer simulation or whatever it is that they're doing. It's some sort of new study that's being published for the first time in that article. And so I do want you to have at least 2 of those as part of your sources. So the idea here is that there's an outline that's due on the 23rd-ish. Like I said, that can be a little bit of a soft deadline if that's helpful, where you're going to be plotting out the structure of your paper. You should note major sections of the paper, talk about the sequence of topics, but it doesn't have to be super long. I mean, some people write outlines and they're like 5 pages long, and if you want to do that, like, that's fine, because you basically have written most of your paper already at that point. But a lot of outlines end up being like a page long, and you're just sort of parsing out the different sections. If you want an example of an outline, I just Googled and then basically hit the I'm feeling lucky button, and that's what I got. But there's no shortage of sort of examples of outlines out there. There's no stringent requirement for format for this thing. It's kind of just, the idea is that you're picking a topic, you're identifying your hypotheses, and then you'll come in, and I'd just like to have a short office hours meeting with you guys. These usually are like 5-minute meetings. They're not meant to be high stakes or confrontational or anything. They're just meant to be, just us chatting about your paper. And this will give us a chance that, if before you start writing the thing, and even really before you do any more research on the thing after you've done your outline, if it looks like, there are ways in which your paper might be going sort of in a negative direction, we can usually sort of correct that. Or if we don't really have 2 alternative explanations, we can talk about that, and I can help you sort of get that on better footing. If you have questions about the paper, that's a great time to be talking about them as well once we have the outline in hand. But again, I'm happy to answer questions at any time throughout this process. So that's the outline, and that's what's due on the 23rd. Well, I would like you to read through the rest of this description. So, this is just sort of a bunch of pointers about actually writing the actual paper. Please do note, it is a formal research paper, so it should be written in sort of a formal tone. It shouldn't be like this long sort of personal conversation talking about frolicking through the woods, as much as I like to hear about you frolicking through the woods. That's great. But it should be, you should be talking more about, like, this is this concept, this is this thing that happens with these animals, and here are 2 alternative explanations, and then you're sort of going into information and support data that support or do not support each of those explanations. Let's see. I think subheaders are helpful as you sort of break apart different parts of your paper. I do ask you not to quote and not to, please obviously don't copy from your sources, and I even don't like you to quote. What I generally will say is that if you use a quotation, I'd like you to follow that up with the next sentence needs to be like you explain the quote in your own words, because otherwise what people will sometimes do, and they'll say, the reason for this thing is quote, and then they just paste like a sentence or 2 that is full of jargon out of some paper, and I don't know what it is, and you don't know what it is, and it needs to be, this is meant to be your chance to sort of articulate the science. So I think from that perspective, I generally discourage quotation if you can at all help it. If you need to have one, that's fine, but just know sometimes I just kind of skip the quotes, because I'm focusing on what you're writing. So you can't actually expect that I'm necessarily going to read it if you do include it. In terms of citations, I don't really care too much for the outline. You do need to have 2 papers identified for the outline, and I think it says that there in the outline section. For the paper itself, I would like you to use the Council of Science Editors format. I know, many people are more comfortable with MLA or APA. Honestly, I think this is easier, and this is more in line with what most biological journals will require. I mean, every biological journal, frankly, is a little bit different in terms of how they do it. The real benefit, I think, of using this method is you do not have to worry about page numbers at all, which I think is a big thing to me. I think MLA and APA make you spend way too much time worrying about the frickin' page number, when really all you need to do in terms of in-text citations is whenever you use a source or you make some claim that needs to be supported and backed up, you just do author, date. It's that easy. It's so, that's so nice. Just author, date. And then in the terms of the actual references, the format ends up, I don't know, to me it looks a little bit like some sort of combination of MLA or APA, but I gave you an example here for how to do a journal article. If you use a book, here's how you cite a book. If you do a chapter in a book, there's that. These are usually for like these edited volumes where different authors write different chapters within the book is the main time you use this format. And then, if you want to use a website, that's fine too. There's sort of a description of how you do that. Jesus, I'm sorry. Okay. In terms of other things, can I use a reference manager? I do encourage you to use reference managers. I really like Mendeley. If you haven't used it yet, it's a really nice system where you can just download PDFs from journal articles and it imports them all, and then it'll output bibliographies. You can actually do citing while you write, so it's all sort of embedded within Microsoft Word. So Zotero is another really nice option, so you can use that. You are responsible for the output of these things, though. So yes, use them to output your bibliography, and most of them have some example of a journal that will pretty much follow this Council of Science Editors format. These guys certainly do, but you need to look at it, right? So like if it outputs and it's outputting no author names because somehow it didn't pull it from the PDFs that you imported, but there really are author names, you need to have the author names in your bibliography. I'm not going to be going through your citations looking for like, do you have the right number of spaces and periods in the right spot and that kind of thing, but you need to have all the info in there. So if you don't have the authors or the journal name, that's going to be a negative in terms of your citation grade. Okay. The paper itself is due on the 29th of October. So you'll have, after you submit the outline, you'll have a little over a month to work on it. And it's not quite at the end of the semester, but it's really close to the end of the semester. Yes?
You said October.
I meant 29th of November.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's due on the 29th of November. Sorry about that. So again, you have a little over a month even after you submit the outline to work on this thing. You can sort of plan your life in that way. Oops, it says you're submitting the paper on Moodle. That's when I was working at Raystown. We're going to be submitting on Canvas, but we will be submitting it via just the normal Canvas system. So it'll be submitted electronically by that due date. And I will have a separate link where you submit PDFs. This is the rubric I use to grade them. It's basically the junior writing competency exam rubric, but I sort of smushed the two writing sections together. So there's it's basically graded on content, and then it's graded on writing. So writing is basically half of the grade. So that does mean that you do need to take some care with the writing of the thing. It needs to be organized and reasonably well structured. And it's not just about avoiding typos and misspelled words. It's about presenting things in sort of a coherent format, varying up your sentence structure, that kind of thing. So that's part of it, is the writing. But then the other part of it is the content. And so we do, I do every once in a while, I'll run into papers, not every once in a while, every semester, that either the content's really good and the writing sort of brings it down, or the writing's really good but the content's lousy. You need to make sure both are in good shape for the paper. That said, most people, if you put time in this thing, most people do well in this assignment. I mean, this is not meant to be an assignment that destroys you. It's meant to be an assignment that allows you to kind of dive into some literature, hopefully find some really cool things, write about them, and hopefully come with a good outcome in terms of your grade at the end. Any questions on the term paper assignment? Seeing none. All right. Yep. As it comes, as you do come up with questions, please feel free to pop over or send me an email. I'm happy to help. Oops. Okay. Well then, so we've done items 1 and 2. Next up is to start chapter 7. So those materials have been up for a while. We were supposed to do it Tuesday, but of course we took advantage of the nice weather that morning, so we're not out there today. So we're going to start into talking about territoriality and migration, which is always fun. Territoriality in particular because you get fights. And then in lab, I do want to meet a bit this afternoon in lab. We will basically continue on with lecture and hopefully have time to talk about the homework as well. We're not going to meet the full time. I think we'll meet for maybe, I'm going to target maybe an hour or so, and then we'll be done. Next week, the plan is, so we have fall break that goes Monday and Tuesday. So we certainly are not going to be meeting Tuesday. We'll be resuming on Thursday, and we'll start into chapter 8. And then we also will be having lab on Thursday. The lab Thursday is the crayfish smackdown lab, I call it. So the crayfish should be coming. So assuming nothing happens with that, they're scheduled to arrive on Wednesday. We'll be using them on Thursday. And basically, we're going to be pitting fights of one crayfish, mono, e-mono, and trying to predict the outcome and the winners based on their physical traits. It's usually a really fun lab. So, yes? They don't usually need a whole lot of provocation. They're pretty aggressive little buggers, so that makes them fun. Oh, yes. So that is our plan. Any questions? We good to go? We'll meet in the Marine Lab. I do not own this room at that time, so we will have to meet in the Marine Lab. Good question. Thank you. Again, I'm shooting for something like an hour. I think will be pretty good for us. All right. Continuing on then. So our topic for today is territoriality and migration. These two topics, they look a little bit different from each other, and in a way they are, but at the same time, they're kind of about choosing where you're living. And I think that's what, in large part, what sort of binds them together and unifies this chapter is choosing where to live. And so actually the chapter, in terms of how it's set up, is going to start with a section on habitat selection. So this is and we're going to talk about optimality theory, game theory a little bit when we're talking about habitat selection. But then we'll get into discussions of territoriality and migration as we move on. So optimality theory basically says that animals should choose the thing that is going to be most beneficial in terms of calories gained per unit time or efficiency. And in terms of habitat selection, there's no real difference there. Animals should be expected to basically choose the habitat that matches or maximizes the reproductive success. And you can see this because, unfortunately, when you look at conservation, one of the biggest problems and one of the most common causes of any kind of conservation problem with animals is habitat destruction. So when habitats are destroyed or damaged, that almost invariably leads to loss of animals because they're unable to choose a habitat where they can maximize the reproductive success. This is an example. This is a least tern. These guys are beach nesters. It's their optimal habitat. This is where they have their maximal reproductive success. And over in California, where these guys were living, there was certainly a great deal of development along beaches. And so as a result, because of human encroachment into their territory, development of the beaches, beach goers frolicking on the beaches, we had a problem where there was basically a loss of habitat, nesting habitat for these animals. And actually, if you look really closely, I always forget about this, but there's a little chick that's sort of peeking out right there. So it's a cute little picture. the cool thing about this is that when this was mitigated, so when the animals, or when there was an effort to conserve some beach space for these animals and give them some breeding habitat, the population rebounded. And so when new beaches are either built or protected, these animals were able to find that habitat again and have a nice rebound on their population. So this is really, kind of the key for understanding how animals are choosing habitats in almost all cases. They're just basically choosing the habitat where they have sort of maximal reproductive success. And so animals will seek out one particular habitat type because that's where what fits the adaptations that they happen to own. There are some cases, though, where it's clear that habitat quality is not just a static entity, where like beach is always the best, for example, or in this case with these black caps, they will nest in a couple different territories. So if you look at the start of any kind of breeding season, these are black caps. So these are, sort of a Eurasian bird, and they're, they look a little bit like they might be sort of a parrot. I don't even know exactly what they are. But these guys, when they are coming back from their southern migration, so they're migrating north again, back into breeding habitats, they seem to strongly prefer stream edge habitats. And the very first habitats within the environment that are colonized and populated by these guys will be stream edge habitats. The most dominant birds tend to settle and to secure territories within stream edge habitats. And so they clearly seem to have a very strong affinity for these stream edge habitat sites. What will happen is as the season goes on, though, more and more males keep coming in, and those males tend to be of a little bit lower quality as time goes on. The best quality males tend to arrive first, and that's sort of a universal thing that we see across a lot of species of birds. That came up on the homework as well. These guys had, what you end up finding, though, is if you go and measure the reproductive success in terms of number of chicks hatched in the stream edge habitat versus some of the less desirable habitats where they end up having to kind of spill over, so they will go into sort of a mixed coniferous forest habitat as well. What you end up finding is that the reproductive success at the stream edge is basically the same as that in the mixed coniferous forest, which is kind of a puzzle. I mean, that doesn't really make sense why they would have this strong affinity for stream edge if, in fact, they're not doing any better at the stream edge than they are over in the mixed coniferous forest. The argument for why they might be doing this basically relies on game theory. So the setup for this is that basically your optimum may depend on what your neighbors are doing as well. And so if you are a late arriving male and you're encountering stream edge habitat, what you end up finding is that the stream edge habitat is very densely inhabited already. And the quality of that habitat is decreasing. Whereas like these mixed coniferous forest habitats have lower density. And so as a result, you may have 4 times the population density in the stream edge versus over in the mixed coniferous forest. So why do you think you would have equal reproductive success in the stream edge habitat versus the mixed coniferous forest then, given this? I mean, they seem to show a strong preference for it. We seem to also have this difference in population density, where the more desirable location is also more densely inhabited. So what do you think? Why would there be equal reproductive success in these two habitats? What do you think? Yeah, so over in the mixed coniferous forest habitat, there's like 25% of the population in the stream edge habitat. So you do have much less competition. Maybe there's a lot less food too, and so there's a lot less that's available to them. But because there's so many fewer birds in there, they seem to do pretty well, and the result is that they have pretty good reproductive success over there. Whereas if you go into the stream edge habitat, maybe there's abundant food and maybe there's lots of really nice shelter locations, but at the same time there's a ton of birds, and so you're competing over those great resources with lots and lots of individuals, 4 times the number of birds in those habitats. So the argument is that as late arriving males come into this system, they will make an assessment. They'll sort of go to the stream edge habitat. They can assess what the population density is somehow. They can go into the mixed coniferous forest habitat, assess that population density, and basically find where is the sort of optimal environment for them given the conditions that already exist, given the fact that the stream quality, the stream edge habitat quality has basically degraded because it's so overpopulated at this point. And so at that point, it's useful to just go ahead and go over to the mixed coniferous forest habitat. So this is sometimes called the ideal free distribution theory. The argument here is that individuals will move freely around within the environment and evaluate different habitats, and then can choose an optimal habitat based on available food and shelter and competition, as well as any other factors that might influence this. So again, it's game theory because your optimal behavior is dependent on what else is going on in your environment. So what other individuals are doing in your environment. In this case, where they have already chosen to be living. So the big point here is that habitat quality, again, as it says at the top, habitat quality is not static, and it's going to depend on not just sort of the raw food abundance and shelter locations, but also competition that exists within that environment. All right. So what I'd like to do now is move on, and I'm kind of moving off, and my outline's bumping around. I need to update that outline and get that better fixed. But I want to talk about territoriality. Because one of the things that can influence whether or not individuals can move freely about within their environment is territoriality. So in many species, you see a situation where males are fairly territorial, females are not. And females have pretty much free reign to move about their environment and try out different habitats. Males may not be able to do that, though, because they may try to go into a particular environment, but then they may encounter a territorial male that will chase them away and prevent them from having access to the resources that are present in there. So here's I'm going to start, we'll start the discussion and conversation by showing you a video. Let me pause here. Territoriality, where we have this troop that maintains a territory collectively. And then they are, to me it's just remarkable how incredibly purposeful this seems. And maybe part of that is because David Attenborough is narrating and everything seems purposeful when he's doing it. But they seem to know what they're doing in terms of encroaching on the other territory, sort of attacking as a group, and sort of a coordinated effort. It seems like they have a pretty good knowledge that they are going after this other band. And researchers that observe chimpanzees have seen, certainly over the years, they'll observe over the years one troop and their interactions with other troops, and this is sort of a result that has come from this. So this is band MCP, which I don't think is the same band that was described in the Attenborough film, but here is an example of them on patrol. So you've got this series of chimpanzees, and they're sort of one after another. They do tend to move around in these groups, and if they encounter individuals from other troops, they often will escalate into some sort of violent encounter. So this, in this case, this is group MCP. My pointer seems to be dying here. But this is group MCP's territory from 1999 to 2008. And what you ended up seeing is that in the 2008-2009 period, they started to encroach on another population's territory. And there were a number of lethal encounters. So this is depicting the number of lethal aggression encounters that happened where somebody died, right? And so in these circumstances, a lot of them were concentrated right around the perimeter of their territory. And what happened is by the end of 2009, this group MCP would tend to patrol and tend to exist out in this area more often. So they've expanded their territory into this swath. So they won this war, effectively, and they're moving, it's about a 20% expansion of territory. And by doing this, they are certainly gaining. So they're gaining control of new resources. There were fig trees, for example, in that picture that are producing fruit. So this is additional food supply for them. It's additional land. So as the group gets larger, they can support larger areas. And that's one of the main things that we often do see animals secure is by having larger territories, be it in this case held by one troop, or even just held by individuals, that you can secure resources within those populations. So that's one of the clear benefits that one gets from territoriality. You also can have sometimes access to mates. So it's not uncommon that in different animal systems you'll see a male secure a territory, and then females that come into that territory, he's the only male around, and therefore he effectively has exclusive access to those females. And oftentimes females will apparently choose males based on the quality of the territory, in part because the females then may get to hang out in that territory and partake of the resources in there by mating with that particular male. So you may improve your access to mates by territoriality as well. Here's another example that's sort of like this, talking about mating opportunities. I think this one's just kind of a charming example. These things are harlequin beetles, and they're big. Like, you can see, that's a nice size animal right there. And they are, in fact, they have their own little territorial interactions that you can see. Here are two males that are kind of going at it. They sort of spread out their sort of forward raptorial appendage and such in their disputes. They're actually not the stars of the show here. So in this slide, what we're actually talking about are pseudoscorpions, which is shown here, which are little tiny, they're very small, and they would be basically about this big. And the cool thing about them is they hitch a ride on these harlequin beetles and use them basically as buses to move and disperse into new habitats. So basically the idea is that pseudoscorpions typically live on trees. When they wish to disperse to new habitats, they will climb on the backs of these harlequin beetles that fly from tree to tree, and then basically just sort of hitch a ride along the way. And the cool thing is the male pseudoscorpions will actually defend the backs of these beetles against other males. Because if other females come along and hitch a ride on the same harlequin beetle that this male is on, that male will often get to mate with those females. And so by patrolling access to this bus, effectively, they will then, they're controlling access to a resource, and then they get exclusive access to those females if they happen to come along and also hitch a ride on the same beetle. It's really about the only time these males are aggressive. So on trees, the territory is just basically too large to control, and there's not really any sort of effective payoff to doing so. So they're not territorial on trees. But on the backs of these beetles, the males are pretty territorial, because it allows an increased mating opportunities for them. So again, there often are substantial benefits that are associated with territoriality. This is kind of the outcome from all of this. I just love the idea of them just hitching a ride on these guys. Certainly there's costs associated with territoriality as well. So we talked about this back in chapter 5-ish when we just covered on the quiz as well, when we were talking about energetic costs associated with high testosterone levels. This is another study that was looking at a similar kind of a thing, where the costs of territoriality seem to come into play. So being territorial, it certainly means that you're going to be expending a lot of energy. It can mean that you're taking part in more fights and more injuries, and therefore you have increased costs and increased injury risk associated with this behavior. And like I said, there was another study that we talked about that was kind of similar. This one's on Eurospiny lizards. So in this case, what they did is they gave them testosterone implants. And those individuals that were given the testosterone implant, they basically monitored to see how well they did over time. And certainly in terms of their activity levels, we saw that the implanted lizards tended to have higher activity levels. So these are the implants, these are control. So the green is the implants, purple is control. And this is basically showing how often or what percentage of these animals were active at any given moment over the course of a day, starting at 6 in the morning and going until, I don't know what, like 5 at night. And what you can see is certainly in both animals, there's sort of a peak right around 9 o'clock in the morning where everybody was pretty active. But if you gave them a testosterone implant, they tended to have elevated activity levels, particularly throughout the afternoon. So they're not taking the normal amounts of rest that they normally would. And this resulted in a decrease in their survivorship. So here again, here's the purple group. These are your controls. here is, in this case, these are the implanted individuals, and this is looking at their percent survival after receiving those implants. And what you can see is almost right away, there's a pretty big drop-off in terms of their survivorship. So they're steadily, we're losing more and more of these individuals that received implants versus controls. Now, in terms of why are they doing that, I mean, it could be something to do with, maybe the surgery was damaging to them, or maybe there's, something that's maybe it's an issue related to immune system that we talked about with testosterone implants. What they did in this study is they actually had a third group, and they gave that third group a food supplement to give them an additional source of calories, with the idea that maybe they could help to supplement the increased costs by providing them with additional calorie sources. And so this is the group that received the food supplement. And what you can see is that not only so they received a supplement, but also they received the testosterone implants. And you can see what happened is they not only kind of reverted back up to the control survivorship, but they even got did it even better. I kind of wish they matched the controls. It would make the data a little bit cleaner, but I mean, this certainly is indicative that what has happened here in terms of the loss of survivorship probably had to do with elevated energy costs, because when you're able to relieve them of those energy costs or allow them to compensate for those energy costs, they seem to rebound very, very well. So again, territoriality probably has substantial costs, and so not everyone should be territorial all the time. It's got to be dependent on the relative benefits you're getting versus the costs that you're paying for that behavior. In many cases, though, there is tremendous benefits that come from owning a territory. So we talked about, you do get these sort of direct benefits. You have better access to the resources, the shelter, so you get better nutrition. You get more mating opportunities. In some cases, you may even get what are sometimes called indirect benefits. So you're not sort of immediately benefiting from these things, but you may get, there's sort of, it's almost like you're getting genetic benefits for your offspring, for example. So you may get access to better quality mates in addition to having access to more mates as a result of having a high quality territory. But as we just saw, they also incur substantial costs. So they're constantly dealing with higher energy costs. They have to be more vigilant. They have risk of injury. If they've got elevated testosterone, maybe they've got impaired immune systems. The cool and to me, that does sort of imply that it's hard to be a territory holder, right? It's an energetically costly thing to do. And yet, if you go and look at contests for territories, you tend to find that almost invariably, when you have a confrontation between an encroaching individual and a territory holder, the territory holder almost always wins. It's very, very rare for them not to win. And that, again, that's kind of puzzling because look at all this stuff that they're incurring as a result of holding the territory. And if you're doing this, it's got to be exhausting, right, over time. And yet they almost always win contests. So I think that's kind of a neat little puzzle. Why would it be the case that they always pretty much win their contests? Now, it's possible, and your book kind of sets this up, and I think they make more of this than I would like to. It's possible that there is kind of just like a rule that the animals operate on, where the territory holder always wins, and that's just like I treat this more of like a null hypothesis, right? So I feel like we need to find some other explanation for this, but maybe they just operate on a rule this way, and that's why we always see territory owners win. But I think we can do better than that. I think we can probably come up with explanations for why they probably always win. Yeah, Tyler.
My thinking personally is that it's just sort of an internal thing that just the winner is built to be the winner.
Yeah, why would he be built to be the winner?
Just the genetic benefits, as you said, it's that the winner is the winner because he's bigger and just less likely to have to be injured.
So he had to win before, probably. We're saying he because more often than not we're dealing with male securing territories, but there are species where it's females. But yeah, to me this is a nice segue here. So one explanation is that you've kind of self-screened your territory holders already most of the time. So most of the time for an individual to be in a position where he is holding a territory, that means he's done something right before. So we've already sort of self-screened him. Most of the time that means that either the individual came upon an empty territory and then fended off any rivals right away and was able to secure it, or maybe was one of these rare times where the encroacher actually defeated the incumbent. And so we already have sort of self-screened these things. These territory holders have already secured a territory. So they've already demonstrated strength, dominance, whatever it is that allows them to secure it. We actually refer to, there's a term that refers to sort of the quality of an individual or the ability of an individual to maintain a territory despite the challenges associated with it. It's called resource holding potential. Or sometimes it's called resource holding power is the other term you'll see. I think your book switched to potential for this edition, had been power. I always learned potential. So I like this better. So the idea is that some individuals have, depending on the quality, depending on whatever it is about them, have better resource holding potential than others. And the individuals that hold a territory probably have already demonstrated that they've already got pretty good resource holding power versus the other standard individuals roaming about in the population. And so for that reason, they're probably pretty likely to win. So I think what we'll do, we'll have to pause here because what I'd like to do is kind of as a preview for next week's lab, ask what traits do you think, if we're talking about crayfish, so here's some crayfish, we're going to do this in lab next week, what kinds of traits might be traits that would prompt high resource holding power in crayfish? And we'll just kind of make a list, but it'll give us sort of a feel, I think, by just doing that, what sorts of traits are likely to be important across other animals as well. All right, so I'll see you guys this afternoon. We'll start at 1:15 in lab. We'll go about an hour.